You're wasting hours every spring replanting the same vegetables over and over again, and it doesn't have to be this way. Most gardeners are locked into an exhausting annual cycle tilling, planting, watering, weeding, harvesting, then starting all over again the next year. But what if I told you there's a completely different approach that lets you plant once and harvest for years, sometimes decades, without replanting, without constant maintenance, and without the backbreaking work that comes with traditional vegetable gardening? This isn't fantasy, it's perennial vegetable gardening, and it's how smart gardeners are reclaiming their time while growing more food than ever before. Welcome to Plant Space Collective, where we grow smarter, not harder. If you're tired of the annual planting treadmill and ready to build a garden that works for you instead of the other way around, you're in exactly the right place. Before we dive in, hit subscribe so you don't miss game-changing gardening strategies that actually save you time and effort, and tap the like button if you've ever wished your garden could just take care of itself. Let's get into it. Vegetable 1. Asparagus. Why asparagus is the ultimate set it and forget it vegetable. Asparagus is the gold standard of perennial vegetables, and once you understand how it works, you'll never want to waste time on annual crops again. A single asparagus crown planted correctly can produce harvestable spears for 20 to 30 years without replanting, reseeding, or any of the maintenance that comes with traditional vegetables. That means one investment of time and effort gives you decades of fresh, tender asparagus every spring, and all you have to do is show up and cut the spears when they emerge. This is the kind of return on investment that transforms how you think about gardening entirely. Asparagus thrives in full sun and well-drained soil, and while it takes 2 to 3 years to establish before you can harvest heavily, the wait is absolutely worth it. During the establishment period, the plant is building an extensive root system that will fuel production for decades. Once established, asparagus sends up thick, delicious spears in early spring, often before most other vegetables are even planted. The harvest window lasts 6 to 8 weeks, and a single mature crown can produce half a pound or more of spears each season. Multiply that by 10 or 20 crowns, and you're looking at serious production with almost zero annual effort. How to plant asparagus for maximum longevity. Start by choosing a permanent location, because asparagus doesn't like being moved. Prepare a trench about 12 inches deep and 18 inches wide, and amend the soil with plenty of compost and aged manure. Asparagus is a heavy feeder, and rich soil makes a massive difference in long-term productivity. Space crowns 12 to 18 inches apart, spreading the roots out in the trench and covering them with 2 to 3 inches of soil. As the spears grow, gradually fill in the trench over the course of the season until it's level with the ground. During the first 2 years, resist the urge to harvest. Let the spears grow into tall, ferny foliage, which feeds the root system and builds strength for future harvests. In year 3, you can begin light harvesting, taking spears for 2 to 3 weeks. By year 4 and beyond, you can harvest heavily for 6 to 8 weeks each spring. After harvest ends, let the remaining spears grow into foliage, which continues feeding the roots throughout summer. In fall, cut the dead foliage to the ground and mulch heavily with compost or straw to protect the crowns through winter. Asparagus is nearly pest and disease-free, requires minimal watering once established, and improves with age. The older the planting, the more productive it becomes. This is a vegetable that literally gets better year after year, giving you more food for less work as time goes on. If you're serious about reducing garden labor while maximizing harvest, asparagus is your starting point. Vegetable 2. Rhubarb. Why rhubarb is the indestructible perennial powerhouse. Rhubarb is one of the toughest, most reliable perennial vegetables you can grow, and once it's in the ground, it's nearly impossible to kill. Rhubarb thrives in cold climates, tolerates neglect, and produces massive quantities of tart, flavorful stalks every spring with almost zero maintenance. A single rhubarb crown can live and produce for 15 to 20 years or more, and mature plants become so vigorous that you'll have more rhubarb than you know what to do with. This is the kind of plant that rewards patience. It takes a year or two to get going, but once established, it's a harvesting machine that requires almost nothing from you. Rhubarb prefers full sun to partial shade and rich, well-drained soil. though it's surprisingly adaptable and will grow in less than ideal conditions. It's also one of the first plants to emerge in spring, often pushing through snow and frozen ground to send up those beautiful crimson stalks. The harvest window is long, 6 to 8 weeks in spring, and sometimes a second, lighter harvest in fall, and the stalks are incredibly versatile. Use them in pies, jams, sauces, or even savory dishes, and freeze or preserve the excess for year-round use. How to plant rhubarb for decades of harvests. Choose a permanent spot with good drainage, because rhubarb doesn't tolerate soggy soil. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep and 18 inches wide, and amend the soil generously with compost or well-rotted manure. Rhubarb is a heavy feeder, and rich soil means bigger, more productive plants. Place the crown in the hole so the buds are just below the soil surface. Then backfill and water thoroughly. Space multiple crowns at least 3 feet apart. Rhubarb grows large, and crowding reduces productivity. During the first year, resist harvesting and let the plant establish. In the second year, you can take a few stalks, but keep it light. By year 3 and beyond, harvest freely for 6 to 8 weeks in spring, cutting stalks at the base and twisting gently to remove them cleanly. Never take more than half the stalks at once, as the remaining foliage continues feeding the crown. Once harvest season ends, let the plant grow undisturbed through summer and fall. Rhubarb requires almost no pest or disease management, though you should remove any flower stalks that appear, as these drain energy from stalk production. Every few years, side dress the plant with compost or aged manure to keep the soil rich and productive. In return, rhubarb will reward you with armloads of stalks every spring for decades, making it one of the lowest maintenance, highest reward perennials you can possibly grow. If you want to plant it once and forget vegetable that actually delivers, rhubarb is it. Vegetable 3. Artichoke. Why artichokes are the ultimate low-maintenance gourmet crop. Artichokes are often thought of as exotic, finicky vegetables that only grow in specific climates. But that's a myth that keeps people from growing one of the most rewarding perennial crops available. In mild climates, artichokes are true perennials that produce for 5 to 7 years or more from a single planting. Even in colder zones, they can be grown as short-lived perennials with minimal winter protection. Once established, artichoke plants are massive, architectural beauties that produce multiple globe-shaped buds every season. And each bud is a restaurant-quality delicacy that you grew yourself with almost no effort. Artichokes thrive in full sun and well-drained soil, and they prefer mild winters and cool summers, making them ideal for coastal climates. However, with mulching and protection, they can survive in zones as cold as Zone 6. The plants are drought-tolerant once established, pest-resistant, and incredibly productive. A single mature plant can produce 10 to 15 artichokes per season, and the harvest period lasts several weeks. The buds themselves are tender, flavorful, and expensive at the grocery store, making this a high-value crop that pays for itself many times over. How to plant artichokes for long-term production. Start with crowns or transplants rather than seeds, as seed-grown artichokes take much longer to produce. Choose a sunny location with excellent drainage. Artichokes hate wet feet and will rot in soggy soil. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep and 18 inches wide, and amend heavily with compost. Artichokes are heavy feeders, and rich soil makes a dramatic difference in bud size and quantity. Place the crown so the growing point is just above the soil surface, backfill, and water deeply. Space plants at least 3 to 4 feet apart, as mature artichokes are large and need room to spread. During the first year, let the plant establish without harvesting heavily. By the second year, you'll see strong production, and from year 3 onward, the plant will produce abundantly. Harvest buds when they're tight and firm, before the scales begin to open. Cut the bud with 2 to 3 inches of stem attached, which keeps the remaining buds healthy and encourages continued production. After the main harvest, cut the plant back to ground level, which forces fresh growth and sometimes a second, smaller harvest in fall. In colder climates, mulch heavily in late fall with straw or leaves to protect the crown through winter. In spring, remove the mulch and side dress with compost to fuel the new season's growth. Artichokes require minimal pest management. Though aphids can occasionally cluster on the buds, a strong spray of water usually handles this. For a perennial vegetable that produces gourmet food with almost no work, Artichokes are in a class of their own. Vegetable 4. Sorrel. Why sorrel is the easiest perennial green you'll ever grow. Sorrel is one of the most underrated perennial vegetables in existence, and once you taste its bright, lemony flavor, you'll wonder why you ever bothered with annual greens. Sorrel grows vigorously, tolerates neglect, and produces fresh, tangy leaves from early spring through late fall with almost zero maintenance. A single plant can live for 4 to 5 years or longer, and because sorrel self-seeds readily, it often perpetuates itself without any intervention. This is a true set-it-and-forget-it green that gives you salads, soups, and sauces for years with almost no effort. Sorrel thrives in full sun to partial shade and tolerates a wide range of soil types, though it prefers rich, well-drained soil. It's also incredibly cold-hardy, surviving winter freezes and bouncing back vigorously each spring. The leaves have a distinct, tart flavor that's perfect for cutting through rich dishes, and they're packed with vitamins and antioxidants. Sorrel is one of the first greens to appear in spring, often emerging weeks before lettuce or spinach, and it continues producing through summer heat that would destroy most annual greens. How to plant sorrel for continuous harvests. Start with transplants or direct seed in early spring. Sorrel germinates quickly and establishes rapidly, so you'll see results within weeks. Choose a spot with good drainage and amend the soil with compost. Space plants 12 to 18 inches apart, as mature sorrel forms large, attractive clumps. Water regularly during establishment. But once the plant is settled, it's remarkably drought-tolerant and requires little care. Harvest by cutting outer leaves at the base, leaving the inner leaves to continue growing. Sorrel produces continuously, so you can harvest lightly every week or two throughout the growing season. The more you harvest, the more it produces, making it an ideal cut and come-again crop. If the plant sends up flower stalks, remove them immediately, as flowering reduces leaf production and makes the leaves more bitter. Cutting back flower stalks forces the plant to focus energy on leaf growth instead of seed production. Sorrel requires almost no pest or disease management, though slugs can occasionally nibble young leaves. A light mulch of straw or compost keeps the soil moist and discourages pests. Every few years, divide mature clumps in early spring to rejuvenate the planting and spread sorrel to new areas of the garden. This is one of the lowest maintenance, most rewarding perennial greens you can grow, and once you have it established, you'll never be without fresh, tangy greens again. Vegetable 5. Walking onions. Why walking onions are the strangest, most self-sufficient perennial allium. Walking onions, also called Egyptian onions or tree onions, are one of the most fascinating and productive perennial vegetables you'll ever grow. They're called walking onions because they literally walk across the garden by producing clusters of tiny bulbs at the top of their stalks, which eventually weigh the stalk down until it touches the ground, where the bulbs root and start a new plant. This means walking onions are self-perpetuating, self-spreading, and require absolutely zero replanting. They plant themselves. Once you introduce them to your garden, they'll provide fresh onions, greens, and bulblets for years without any effort from you. Walking onions are incredibly hardy, thriving in zones 3 through 9, and they tolerate poor soil, drought, and neglect better than almost any other vegetable. They produce edible greens in early spring, long before most crops are up, and the bulbs and bulblets are flavorful and versatile. The greens can be used like scallions, the bulblets can be pickled or used whole in cooking, and the underground bulbs can be harvested like shallots. This is a vegetable that gives you multiple harvests from a single planting, and it does so year after year without any help from you. How to plant walking onions for a self-sustaining harvest. Start with bulbs or bulblets rather than seeds, as they establish faster and begin producing immediately. Plant in fall or early spring in a sunny location with decent drainage. Walking onions aren't picky about soil, but they perform best in moderately fertile, well-drained ground. Plant bulbs 2 to 3 inches deep and 6 to 8 inches apart, or plant bulblets 1 inch deep and 4 to 6 inches apart. Water after planting, but don't fuss over them. These onions thrive on neglect. Harvest greens by cutting the outer leaves at the base, just like chives or scallions. The plant will continue producing new leaves throughout the growing season. Harvest bulblets in late summer or early fall when they form at the top of the stalks. You can harvest some for eating and leave others to fall and replant themselves, which keeps the colony expanding. Underground bulbs can be dug in fall or early spring and used like shallots. Walking onions require almost no maintenance, no fertilizing, no pest management, and no disease control. They spread on their own, fill in empty spaces, and create a continuous supply of fresh onions without replanting. If they spread too aggressively, simply pull up the excess plants and share them with friends or move them to a new location. For a truly hands-off, self-perpetuating perennial vegetable, walking onions are unbeatable. Vegetable 6, sea kale. Why sea kale is the forgotten perennial that deserves a comeback. Sea kale is one of the most underutilized perennial vegetables in modern gardens, and that's a shame because it's productive, delicious, and nearly indestructible. Sea kale was a prized crop in European gardens for centuries. Grown for its tender, blanched shoots that emerge in early spring, the shoots have a mild, slightly nutty flavor similar to asparagus, and they're incredibly versatile in the kitchen. A single sea kale plant can live and produce for 10 to 15 years or more, and once established, it requires almost no care. This is the kind of perennial vegetable that makes you look like a gardening genius while doing almost nothing. Sea kale thrives in full sun and well-drained, sandy soil, and it's extremely drought-tolerant once established. It's also salt-tolerant, making it ideal for coastal gardens where other vegetables struggle. The plant produces large, blue-gray leaves and tall stalks of white flowers in summer, which are beautiful enough to include in ornamental plantings. But the real prize is the spring shoots, which are harvested young and blanched to improve flavor and tenderness. These shoots are expensive and hard to find in stores, making sea kale a high-value crop that pays for itself many times over. How to plant sea kale for years of gourmet harvests. Start with crowns or root cuttings rather than seeds, as they establish faster and begin producing sooner. Choose a sunny location with excellent drainage. Sea kale will rot in heavy, wet soil. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep and 18 inches wide, and amend with sand and compost to improve drainage and fertility. Place the crown so the growing point is just below the soil surface, backfill, and water thoroughly. Space plants at least 2 to 3 feet apart as mature sea kale forms large clumps. During the first year, let the plant establish without harvesting. In the second year, you can begin light harvesting, but keep it minimal. By year 3 and beyond, harvest freely in early spring when shoots are 6 to 8 inches tall. To blanch the shoots, cover the emerging plant with a large pot, bucket, or specialized forcing cover to exclude light. This keeps the shoots pale, tender, and mild-flavored. Harvest shoots by cutting at the base, and once harvest is complete, remove the cover and let the plant grow normally through summer. Sea kale requires almost no maintenance, no fertilizing, no watering after establishment, and no pest or disease management. The plant dies back in fall, and in spring, it reemerges with fresh shoots ready to harvest. For a perennial vegetable that produces gourmet food with almost zero effort, sea kale is one of the best-kept secrets in gardening. Vegetable 7, horseradish. Why horseradish is the indestructible perennial condiment crop? Horseradish is one of the toughest, most aggressive perennial vegetables you can grow, and once it's in the ground, it's nearly impossible to remove. That might sound like a problem, but for anyone who loves fresh horseradish, it's a blessing. A single horseradish root planted correctly will spread, multiply, and produce pungent, flavorful roots for decades without replanting or any real maintenance. Horseradish is so vigorous that the bigger challenge is containing it rather than keeping it alive, and this makes it one of the ultimate plant-it-once-and-forget crops. Horseradish thrives in full sun and rich, deep soil, and it's incredibly cold-hardy, surviving winters in zones 3 through 9. The roots are harvested in fall or early spring, when they're at their most pungent, and fresh horseradish is exponentially more flavorful than anything you'll find in stores. Grate it fresh for sauces, condiments, or cocktails, and preserve the excess by freezing or pickling. A single mature plant produces multiple large roots each year, which is far more than most households can use, making horseradish an excellent crop to share or trade. How to plant horseradish for a lifetime supply. Start with root cuttings rather than seeds. Horseradish doesn't come true from seed, and root cuttings establish quickly. Choose a location where the plant can spread, or plant it in a large, buried container to contain the roots. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep and amend the soil with compost. Plant the root cutting at a 45-degree angle with the top 2 inches below the soil surface. Water after planting, and that's essentially it. Horseradish takes care of itself from there. Harvest roots in fall after the first frost, or in early spring before new growth begins. Dig carefully around the plant and remove the largest roots, leaving smaller roots in place to continue growing. Trim the harvested roots, peel, and grate immediately, as horseradish loses pungency quickly once cut. Mix grated horseradish with vinegar to preserve flavor and prevent oxidation. Horseradish requires no fertilizing, no watering after establishment, and no pest or disease management. The biggest challenge is controlling its spread, so check periodically and remove any roots growing outside the desired area. For a perennial vegetable that produces endlessly with zero effort, horseradish is unmatched. Vegetable 8. Lovage. Why lovage is the celery alternative that never stops. Producing lovage is a massive, hardy perennial herb that tastes like celery but requires a fraction of the effort. While celery is notoriously difficult, requiring constant watering, rich soil, and careful attention, lovage thrives on neglect and produces abundantly for 10 to 15 years or more from a single planting. Every part of the plant is edible: leaves, stems, seeds, and roots, making it one of the most versatile perennial vegetables you can grow. Use the leaves and stems in soups, stocks, and salads, the seeds as a spice, and the roots as a cooked vegetable. This is a plant that gives you celery flavor year-round, without any of the hassle. Lovage thrives in full sun to partial shade and tolerates a wide range of soil types, though it prefers rich, moist soil. It's incredibly cold-hardy, surviving winters in zones 3 through 8, and it's one of the first plants to emerge in spring. Mature lovage plants can grow 5 to 6 feet tall, forming massive clumps that produce armloads of flavorful leaves throughout the growing season. The flavor is strong and concentrated, so a little goes a long way, which means 1 or 2 plants are usually enough for most households. How to plant lovage for decades of celery flavor. Start with transplants or direct seed in early spring. Lovage germinates slowly, so transplants save time. Choose a permanent location with good soil and decent drainage. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep and 18 inches wide, and amend with compost. Plant the crown so the growing point is at soil level, backfill, and water thoroughly. Space plants at least 3 feet apart, as mature lovage is enormous. Harvest by cutting outer stems at the base, leaving the inner growth to continue producing. Lovage produces continuously throughout the growing season, so you can harvest lightly every week or 2. If the plant sends up flower stalks, you can remove them to extend leaf production, or leave them to mature and harvest the seeds for flavoring. In fall, the plant dies back, and in spring, it reemerges with fresh, tender growth. Lovage requires almost no maintenance, no fertilizing, minimal watering, and no pest or disease management. Every few years, divide mature clumps to rejuvenate the plant and spread lovage to new areas. For a perennial vegetable that replaces celery with almost zero effort, lovage is essential. Vegetable 9. Good King Henry. Why Good King Henry is the forgotten perennial spinach alternative. Good King Henry is an ancient perennial vegetable that was once a staple in European gardens, and it deserves a serious comeback. This hardy perennial produces edible leaves, shoots, and flower buds, all of which taste similar to spinach and can be cooked or eaten raw. Unlike spinach, which bolts in heat and requires replanting multiple times per season, Good King Henry produces from early spring through fall and lives for 10 to 15 years or more from a single planting. This is a true set-it-and-forget-it green that gives you spinach-like harvests year after year with almost no work. Good King Henry thrives in full sun to partial shade and tolerates poor soil better than most vegetables, though it performs best in rich, well-drained ground. It's incredibly cold-hardy, surviving winters in zones 3 through 8, and it's one of the first greens to emerge in spring. The young shoots can be blanched and eaten like asparagus, the leaves can be used like spinach, and the flower buds can be cooked like broccoli. This is a vegetable that gives you multiple harvests from a single plant, making it one of the most versatile perennials you can grow. How to plant good King Henry for continuous greens. Start with transplants or direct seed in early spring. Choose a location with good drainage and amend the soil with compost. Plant seeds or transplants 12 to 18 inches apart, as mature plants form large clumps. Water regularly during establishment, but once the plant is settled, it's remarkably drought tolerant. Harvest young leaves by cutting the outer growth at the base, leaving the inner leaves to continue producing. The more you harvest, the more it produces. In spring, harvest young shoots by cutting them at ground level and blanching them to improve flavor. In late spring, harvest flower buds before they open and cook them like broccoli. Good King Henry requires almost no maintenance, no fertilizing, minimal watering, and no pest or disease management. Every few years, divide mature clumps to rejuvenate the planting. For a perennial vegetable that replaces spinach with almost zero effort, Good King Henry is unbeatable. Vegetable 10. Sunchokes, Jerusalem artichokes. Why sunchokes are the ultimate hands-off perennial tuber crop. Sunchokes, also called Jerusalem artichokes, are one of the most productive, low-maintenance perennial vegetables you can grow, and once you plant them, they'll produce forever without replanting. Sunchokes are native to North America, incredibly hardy, and produce massive yields of edible tubers with almost zero effort. The tubers have a sweet, nutty flavor and can be eaten raw, roasted, mashed, or pickled. A single sunchoke plant can produce pounds of tubers, and because you never harvest all of them, they regrow year after year, spreading and multiplying on their own. Sunchokes thrive in full sun and tolerate poor soil, drought, and neglect better than almost any other vegetable. They're also incredibly vigorous, growing 6 to 10 feet tall and forming dense stands that crowd out weeds and create privacy screens. The plants produce bright yellow flowers in late summer, which are beautiful and attract pollinators. The tubers are harvested in fall after the first frost, when their flavor is sweetest, and they can be left in the ground all winter and harvested as needed. How to plant sunchokes for a lifetime supply. Start with tubers rather than seeds. Plant in early spring in a sunny location where the plants can spread. Sunchokes are aggressive, so plant them where they won't overtake other crops. Dig a trench 4 to 6 inches deep. Place tubers 12 to 18 inches apart and cover with soil. Water after planting, and that's it. Sunchokes take care of themselves. Harvest tubers in fall by digging around the plant and removing the largest tubers, leaving smaller ones to regrow. The more you harvest, the more they spread, so control them by harvesting aggressively. Sunchokes require no fertilizing, no watering, and no pest or disease management. For a perennial vegetable that produces endlessly with zero effort, sunchokes are unmatched. And there you have it, 10 perennial vegetables you only plant once and harvest for years. From asparagus and rhubarb to sunchokes and lovage, each of these crops gives you maximum food for minimum effort, breaking the cycle of annual replanting and transforming your garden into a low-maintenance food production system. Which perennial vegetable are you planting first? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you want more smart, sustainable gardening strategies that save time and effort, hit that subscribe button and join the Plant Space Collective community. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if it changed how you think about vegetable gardening. Remember, you don't have to replant every year. Plant once, harvest forever, and let your garden work for you.